America's $37 trillion debt reset, the stablecoin strategy. At the recent Eastern Economic Forum, one of Putin's closest advisors dropped a bombshell. Anton Kobyakov said the United States is preparing to use crypto and stablecoins to secretly devalue its entire $37 trillion debt, moving it into what he called the crypto cloud, then resetting the system while the world holds the bag. Now, this isn't some random official. This is Putin's senior economic advisor for over a decade. The guy who's been in the room for every major Russian economic decision since 2012. And here's the thing. He's actually right about the devaluation part. But Russia misunderstands the mechanism. They think we're going to print stablecoins out of thin air like we print dollars. That's not how this works. The reality is way more sophisticated, and it involves $3.2 trillion in sterilized reserves that have been frozen since 2008, the Genius Act that just became law, and a mechanism that's already in motion. Let me show you how this actually works. Section 1. The historical playbook. Before we talk about stablecoins, you need to understand the pattern, because America has run this exact playbook multiple times before. 1933, the gold confiscation. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. Didn't ask Congress. Didn't negotiate. One signature. The government confiscated America's gold at $20.67 per ounce, then immediately revalued it to $35. That's a 69% devaluation overnight. You had $100 in savings, now it buys $31 worth of stuff. But the government's debt? It just became 69% cheaper to repay. 1971, the Nixon shock. Nixon closed the gold window. Rug pulled the entire world. Dollars would no longer be backed by gold. Foreign nations holding dollars expecting redemption? Promise broken. Since then, the dollar has lost 96% of its purchasing power. 1985, the Plaza Accords. 5 countries agreed to devalue the dollar by 25% over 2 years. It was coordinated. It was planned. It worked. 2008 to 2025, the QE era. Just from January 2020 to today, money supply grew from $15.5 trillion to $21.9 trillion. That's a 40% expansion in just 4 to 5 years. What happened to everything priced in dollars? Gas up 50%, homes up 50%, food up 30%, property insurance up 70%. That $37 trillion in debt still says $37 trillion on paper, but it buys 40% less in real terms. The government just cut the real debt burden by 40% without paying back a single dollar. Section 2. The crisis and the new mechanism. Here's the problem America faces right now that Russia actually understands correctly. The foreign buyer problem. Foreign ownership of U.S. debt dropped from 34% to 23%. China dumped Treasuries from $1 trillion down to $756 billion. That's a 25% reduction. Japan's been selling consistently. These nations watched 1971. They watched 2008. They know the playbook. They're not buying anymore. The U.S. government now spends over $1 trillion per year just on interest payments. More than defense, more than Medicare. When you can't find foreign buyers, your system breaks down. Yields spike. Interest costs explode. You need a new mechanism. Enter the Genius Act, December 2025. The Genius Act became law in December 2025. It creates a legal framework for dollar-backed stablecoins with one critical requirement. Every stablecoin must be backed by U.S. Treasuries or cash. Here's how this works in practice. Someone gives Tether $1, Tether must buy Treasuries. Someone gives Circle $1, Circle must buy Treasuries. Automatic. Mandatory. Built into law. Current scale. Right now, Tether holds $127 billion in U.S. Treasuries. Circle holds $55 billion. Combined, they're the 18th largest holder of U.S. debt worldwide, bigger than Germany, bigger than South Korea. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent projects stablecoins will hit $3.7 trillion by 2030. But they're growing 40% annually. At that rate, we hit $3.7 trillion by 2027. That's $3.7 trillion in guaranteed perpetual treasury demand. China can dump all they want. We don't need them anymore. Section 3. The sterilized reserves. The secret weapon. Now here's the part Russia doesn't understand. The part that makes this mechanism truly powerful. The $3.2 trillion hidden in plain sight. U.S. banks currently have $3.2 trillion sitting at the Federal Reserve as excess reserves. This is money that's been parked there since quantitative easing back in 2008 for over 16 years now. This is what's called sterilized reserves. It's dead money. It can't be lent out. It's not in circulation. It just sits there earning interest on excess reserves, IOER, at about 0.5%. The Fed gave banks this money but doesn't want it getting into the economy because it would cause massive inflation. If all that money suddenly hit the economy, people buying vacations, cars, going out to eat, prices would explode. So they pay banks to keep it locked up. That's why it's called sterilized. The Genius Act unlocks it. Here's the mechanism that changes everything. The Genius Act allows banks to use these Fed deposits as stablecoin backing. A bank can take $1 billion in excess reserves, back $1 billion in stablecoins, and boom, it's the same money, but now it's moving. Not new money. The same money. Just activated. This is what Russia missed. Russia thinks we're printing stablecoins like we print dollars. But that's not it. Every stablecoin needs a real dollar behind it. You can't just create them from nothing. But what we can do is unleash $3.2 trillion. That's been frozen since 2008. That money starts circulating through stablecoins. Prices start to adjust globally. The dollar weakens. The $37 trillion debt gets devalued. Not through printing, through activation of reserves that already exist. That's the genius Putin's advisor didn't quite grasp. Section 4. How the devaluation actually works. Let me show you exactly how the devaluation mechanism operates. Traditional devaluation, the old way. When the US inflates the traditional dollar, the pain hits Americans first and hardest. Grocery bills spike. Gas prices jump. Housing becomes unaffordable. CPI reports hit the news. People get angry. Political pressure builds. That limits how much devaluation you can actually get away with. Stablecoin devaluation, the new way. With stablecoins, the system looks decentralized and private. That person in Argentina escaping inflation who buys USDT? Treasury buyer. That business in Turkey avoiding lira collapse using USDC? Treasury buyer. That trader in Nigeria accessing global markets? Treasury buyer. They're all funding America's deficit without knowing it. And when the devaluation comes through activation of those $3.2 trillion in reserves, the pain gets exported worldwide. Distributed liability. When your debt is held by foreign central banks, they can dump it. They can coordinate. China and Japan are doing exactly that. But when your debt is backing hundreds of millions of stablecoin users scattered across every country, embedded in their daily payment systems, they can't coordinate an exit. They're stuck. The natural state principle. Here's something critical to understand. The natural state of the economy is deflationary. As technology improves and productivity increases, things should get cheaper over time. But they don't, because we keep creating more money. When new money floods the system, it has to find a home. Real estate, stocks, gold, Bitcoin. Those assets aren't really going up. The dollar is going down. Section 5. Why the world is screaming with gold. The world sees exactly what's coming, and they're voting with their actions. Gold just hit $2,777 an ounce. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace since 1967. 4 straight years of over 1,000 tons annually. Let me show you the numbers. 2022 to 1,082 tons, highest since 67. 2023 to 1,037 tons. 2024 to 1,045 tons. 2025 to 669 tons through Q3 alone. On pace for another 1,000 plus ton year. Who's buying? Poland. 67 tons in 2025, biggest buyer. Czech Republic. 29 straight months of buying, tripled reserves since 2023. Turkey. 26 consecutive months of buying. China. Added 36 plus tons in 9 straight months, and that's just what they report. Real numbers likely double or triple. These aren't gold bugs. These are central banks, the most conservative institutions on earth. And they're all doing the same thing, dumping dollars, buying gold. Why? Because they see the $3.2 trillion in sterilized reserves. They see the $3.7 trillion stablecoin projection. They see the activation coming. When Poland triples their gold reserves, they're not speculating on price. When Turkey buys for 26 straight months, they're not trading. They're protecting themselves from the coming devaluation. That's why gold's at all-time highs. The world sees what's happening. Section 6. The Bitcoin angle and Michael Saylor's plan. There's another piece to this puzzle that Russia's advisor didn't mention. Bitcoin. Michael Saylor's advice to Trump. Michael Saylor publicly advised President Trump to, quote, dump all the US gold and buy Bitcoin. His exact pitch: sell all the US gold. Buy 5 million Bitcoin. You'll demonetize the entire gold asset class. Our enemies hold gold in their banks. Their assets go to zero. Our assets go to $100 trillion. We control the world's reserve capital network. What actually happened? Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent killed it. He said no taxpayer dollars for Bitcoin. The Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Bill appears dead on arrival. But here's the back door. While the government won't openly buy Bitcoin, there's another way. Look at the pattern. SpaceX builds rockets. NASA contracts them. Amazon builds AWS. CIA uses the servers. MicroStrategy buys Bitcoin. Government takes equity stake. Remember the CHIPS Act? The government didn't just buy Intel stock. They gave Intel $50 billion in subsidies and took warrants, an equity position. MicroStrategy now holds hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. What if the government eventually takes a 10% stake in MSTR, the way they did with Intel? The reserve gets built privately. The government captures the value later. No headlines, no panic. Section 7, the three-phase timeline. Here's exactly where we are in the cycle. Phase 1, foundation building, 2023 to 2025 complete. Genius Act passed December 2025. Regulatory framework established. Approved issuers in place. $3.2 trillion. Sterilized reserves identified. Phase 2, adoption acceleration, 2025 to 2027. We are here. Stablecoins growing 40% annually. Current pace hits $3.7 trillion by 2027, not 2030. Integration into global payment systems. Approved issuers expanding. Banks, Apple, Meta potentially. At 40% annual growth, we hit the critical mass 3 years ahead of Bessent's projection. Phase 3, reserve activation, 2027-2028. Once stablecoin adoption reaches $3-4 trillion, the $3.2 trillion in sterilized reserves starts flowing through the system. Result: global liquidity expansion. Dollar purchasing power declines. Debt burden devalues in real terms. Everyone holding stablecoins shares the pain. 3 signals to watch. Acceleration beyond 40% growth, happening now. Major tech companies announce stablecoins. Apple, Meta, Amazon. Government narrative. Digital dollar modernization. When you hear signal number 3, phase 3 is activating. Conclusion: protection strategy. Putin's advisor is right about the devaluation. He's just wrong about the mechanism. The playbook repeats every 40 to 50 years. 1933. Gold confiscation. 69% devaluation. 1971. Nixon shock. 96% purchasing power loss. 1985. Plaza Accords. 25% coordinated devaluation. 2008 to 2025. QE. 40% monetary expansion. 2025 to 2028. Stablecoin activation. TBD. How to protect yourself. Do what central banks do. Gold. Central banks buying 1,000 plus ton per year. Bitcoin. 24x faster than gold in last reset. Real assets. Real estate, commodities, productive assets. Hard assets that adjust to inflation. The world is screaming the answer at us through their actions. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace in 57 years. The reset isn't coming. It's already in motion. The question is whether you'll see it before phase 3 activates.